So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the EuropaBio webinar today as part of our 25th anniversary program. So we're very happy to welcome you to Healthy Planet, Healthy People, a meeting that is of interest across all of our membership and something that has a very high priority for industry and research and policymakers and indeed patients worldwide. So we're looking today with an expert panel from across the entire spectrum on how biopharmaceuticals and the pharmaceutical sector follows the world in developing a pathway to a transition to sustainability. It's an extremely interesting topic, particularly within the pharmaceuticals, as it's a very complex ecosystem. You have very long and complex research phases, development, clinical trials, patient use, disposal. It brings in multiple stakeholders, both administering and using aspects of the pharmaceutical sector and biopharmaceuticals themselves. And so the sustainability aspect is one that goes through an incredibly long and complex pathway. We will be delighted to discuss the entire thing today in our 75-minute webinar. However, what we will do is use this as a starting point for future conversations as well, and take a look at some of the top-level topics that drive how pharmaceutical companies and indeed the wider sector as a whole are helping the whole pharmaceutical sector to transition to a more sustainable basis. So I'm joined today by a really amazing panel of people, and I'll give you a little bit of housekeeping now. We're going to record the webinar, so you will be able to catch up with it when it's published on YouTube. You are very welcome to add in questions in the chat function on WebEx, and we'll ask as many of those questions as possible. We already had quite a lot of questions in through the registration process, so we may not be able to get to all of the questions today. However, we will use those to help shape future activities from EuropaBio. So as you can see before you, we have a really busy session coming up. And this is really an important part of our 25 years of innovation, because as EuropaBio hits its quarter-century mark, we're looking back at the landmark breakthroughs in biotechnology that have really shaped both environmental and healthcare advances from across the world, and the role that Europe has played in helping to develop that and deliver it. And so our panelists today, you will see, come from a broad spread of organizations. And what we're going to do is have an opening session where each participant gives a short 5-minute sort of headline presentation or overview of their role, their priorities, and then we'll move in the second half of the webinar to more structured questions across all the panelists. So I'm going to now ask our opening participant, Jutta, to give us some opening comments from the European Parliament perspective. So Jutta, if you would like to switch on your camera and your microphone, we would be absolutely delighted if you would share some of your own priorities from a parliamentary perspective on how pharmaceuticals have to take this sustainable pathway forwards.
Yes, thank you very much, Claire. Thank you very much for inviting me to this important event, and I'm really happy that we have such an interested audience here on this issue of healthy planet, healthy people, which is so closely connected to our SDGs, our Sustainable Development Goals. I was asked, where does Europe currently stand with pharmaceutical manufacturing? What's done here? What can be addressed? What is done globally? Well, COVID-19 has highlighted the problems which basically were there before already. So we were quite astonished to find out that we were not able to produce pharmaceutical ingredients here. We were not even able to produce masks, which were so important in the pandemic here. But at the end of the day, we must see that the pharmaceutical production was moved to other countries in the course of the globalization during the last 20 years. And we have seen shortages of medicines already in the recent years, even for very common active ingredients such as ibuprofen, for example, where patients coming to the pharmacies were quite well astonished or shocked that they could not have access to their medicines, which they urgently need. But what happened actually if we do say, well, we have to be more resilient in crisis, we have to move back the production of pharmaceutical ingredients. Of course, this will not be enough, because you can only produce pharmaceutical ingredients if you have the basic chemicals here. And if production of the basic chemicals is still in China or India or Vietnam or Indonesia or wherever, then you will not be able to produce your active ingredients either. So I think we should have a look at why was this production moved. And if we look at chemical industry, there the chemical production is highly automated. So the wage level is not the main issue. But what's more relevant is permitting and environmental legislation. I would like to highlight here that environment has no borders. So airborne pollutants will eventually come back to us. And it's even the same with missing or inadequate wastewater treatment, because through this inadequate wastewater treatment, you will, for example, create multi-resistance bacteria which can escape any antibiotic treatment. When I was working in the quality management at the hospital before becoming a politician, which I became not so very long ago, actually, we routinely tested people that had been traveling to India, because a lot of them were actually carrying multi-resistance bacteria. There's this famous river Musi in Hyderabad, where the most resistant bacteria ever on the planet are present in the water of the river, which is used to irrigate the fields where people are growing their rice and vegetables. And that's something that will hit us sooner or later. The question is only when. And there, I think we really should take action. The same, of course, is true for communicable diseases, as we have all now learned, where a disease which developed in China spread all over the planet at incredible speed, and really knocked out the worldwide economy very, very quickly, because we were not sufficiently prepared. But I think we should be prepared, because I do believe, I mean, I'm 54 years old. I don't think that this will be the last pandemic which I will encounter. We had this report from the IPBES, which is sort of like the IPCC for climate. The IPBES is for biodiversity. And they produced a report last year on the age of pandemics looming due to the destruction of biodiversity and due to the ever more pressure on the wilderness areas. So I think it's very important that we will be better prepared the next time, but also that we try to lower our impact on the biodiversity and on the environment. For example, if we look at what I said, wastewater treatment, if you look at the GMP guidelines, good manufacturing practice, we have a lot of issues, very detailed, on how quality has to be enshrined in the production of pharmaceuticals in order to have high quality, very clean, very well documented pharmaceuticals that will be brought into the value chain. But there's nothing at all on environmental issues. So if we would manage to enshrine, for example, how do you have to treat your wastewater? How do you have to treat your waste? How are you going to produce your raw materials? How are you going to treat your animals that you're using for your tests? Then, of course, this would also be a precaution for further environmental catastrophes, which are actually triggered also by our pharmaceutical production. And of course, this will need research, and this will cost money, but I think this is very well invested money, and we should do so, and we should find a way to reimburse the companies that are doing well here. On a second issue, I think it is very important to try to bring the benign by design approach also to the pharmaceutical production. For example, we have a lot of active ingredients that are produced as racemats, where you have the chiral molecule. One is active, one is actually not active. But if you produce it in a chemical factory, you always get both parts, and you will feed both parts to the patient, although the patient's body will only be able to use one of this. The other part is wasted resources and pressure on the environment. And I think these are the things where we need to focus on when we are trying to improve our pharmaceutical production. I think it is very important to have this One Health approach, healthy people, healthy animals, healthy environment, in order to be able to live on a healthy planet for our generation, but also for future generations. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much indeed, Jutta. And you raise all of these points are incredibly relevant because we are one with the environment in which we live. And so even if we won't see the results tomorrow, it's incredibly important that we take these steps now to address problems that will be coming down the line. You know, as we know with as COVID emerged, you know, it's been predicted for a really long time and we were not best able to respond to it. But let's take a step over to our first pharmaceutical speaker to get the view from Novartis. So Montse, do you want to open your camera and your microphone and share with us the position that Novartis is taking in terms of its pathway to sustainability?
Thank you very much, Claire. It's really a great pleasure to be here with all of you. Definitely the health of the people, it's very much close linked to the health of the planet. As a member of the European Parliament, EuropaBio have just mentioned it. There are so many examples that have really shown how much it is that close link, either with the air pollution, either with the climate change, the disease spread and allergies, etc. So definitely investing in sustainable solutions is not a nice thing to do. It's really a must do. We need to do all of this. It's really, we need to join efforts all together, all the stakeholders to make that happen. At Novartis, we have really adopted a can-do mentality to accelerate the sustainability mindset and green processes. The pharmaceutical industry is one of the key contributors as well on the green agenda. By implementing sustainable solutions from green energy to green chemistry, we wanted to partner with policymakers and civil society to reach the key targets set by the Commission. At Novartis, we are really committed and we want to be a catalyst for a positive change and a global leader on environmental sustainability. And our continued investment in our planet supports our purpose to reimagine medicines to improve and extend people's lives. The Novartis strategy, it has been really built in 4 key areas. The first one is related mainly for planet, and that it is where we are really want to minimize all our impact on the planet, protect the biodiversity, which we have already seen before that is really very important, and driving carbon neutrality across the value chain by 2030 and become net zero by 2040. We also aim to be water sustainable and plastic neutral by 2030. For example, to be able to reach these goals, we have already teamed up with various developers to build 6 solar panels and wind parks in Spain. These agreements will help us to eliminate 30% of our remaining scope 1 and 2 emissions and to achieve the 100% carbon neutrality for electricity procured in Europe. Another aspect that we want also is what we want to build to the patients as well. What we want to provide to the patients that our medicines are as well sustainable. So we wanted really to build sustainable design principles into the new and existing products will involve the end-to-end review and adopt of the drug development life cycle from early stages of the research to the product development, marketing, and delivery. For example, we have already been working with a full life cycle assessment for a dry powder inhaler devices to make sure they are really sustainable and by design. And we try to have such a process in place now, not only for all the new medicines that are coming from 2030 onwards, but as well what it is currently in our portfolio to be able to reach these ambitious goals. The other very important aspect is all of us, people. So how much we are really encouraging our associates across Novartis to adopt environmental sustainability mindset in the way that they operate, in the way that they are making decisions, in the way that they are defining processes through different tools, through different resources that we have already established in the organization. And the last one is what we call policy, where we want to have a strong voice and possibly contribute to the global sustainability agenda. And that's why we need to work very closely together with all of you to really bring joint forces to make that happen. So we're really very happy to be represented in this high panel, but definitely we need to really work all together to this agenda, and we're partnering all together to reach this common goal for us to be able to reduce emissions and becoming carbon neutral. Thank you very much, Claire. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Motsi. And you already brought in the really good point about the complexity of the chain of organizations that you work with. So it's not about just what Novartis does and provides into the medicine supply chain. It's about the global supply chain that also works with you to be able to develop and create and distribute those medicines as well. Because I think we talk a lot about, you know, reshoring manufacturing into Europe, but of course it's incredibly important to recognize that this is already a global activity, and so it needs to become sustainable on a global level rather than just in Europe. So thank you so much, Motsi. And I think we can now move to another perspective, which brings in one of the important stakeholders, which is, of course, the European Commission. So I would like to invite Carmen to switch on your camera, Carmen, and unmute your microphone and share with us how you see these priorities from DG Research and Innovation.
Thank you very much, Claire, for inviting me to discuss about this very important topic. I personally like very much the title you gave, Healthy Planet, Healthy People, which is fully in line with this in the context of this emerging concept of planetary health. My unit this is a very important topic for my unit, health innovations and ecosystems in DG Research, because precisely we are responsible, between other things, of the destination of Cluster 1 of Horizon Europe. Cluster 1 is focusing on health, and there is a full destination looking at the impact of environment in our health. Because indeed, environment is a major determinant, that has already been said. And actually, 20% of all deaths in Europe are estimated to be somehow attributable to the importance of environmental stressors. So it is a critical topic. But further to the impact of the environment in health, where our unit is quite active. Obviously, the Green Deal is one of the most important political priorities for the European Commission. And it is clear that under the chemical strategy and the Zero Pollution Action Plan, this topic is one of that we are discussing today is critical. And not only for the pure impact on the environment, which is essential for many things, but also because the cost of compliance with the new high environmental standards of the European Union is considered as one of the main reasons for the pharmaceutical manufacturing leaving the European Union. So it is a critical aspect that needs to be tackled, because it results, as we saw in the recent crisis that we are still not fully get rid of, that how much this creates vulnerabilities into the supply chains, the reduced number of suppliers of critical inputs, the lack of geographical diversification of the suppliers, the lack of critical manufacturing capacity. So we really need to tackle this aspect, not only for the environmental impact, but also for economic and health-related issues. From the pure research and innovation perspective, we will tackle it from using the different instruments that we have at our disposal in the context of Horizon Europe, notably the collaborative research, collaborative grants, and also through the partnerships and missions that are going to be particularly looking at these environmental aspects. To give you an example of how this item was already considered very high in the research and innovation agenda, even before the emergence of the crisis, we put forward in the first work program of Horizon Europe that was launched in June this year, but where we started working long ago as in the different proposal of the Commission, the different strategic plan, and the different documents that are really directing the efforts. So we put forward a topic on green pharmaceuticals that precisely wants to support the development of green pharmaceuticals that degrade more readily to harmless substances in waste, water treatment plants, and the environment. And that is also looking at innovative manufacturing technologies that are greener, low in energy consumption and emissions. A topic of 40 million euros that the deadline was in September last month and is currently under evaluations. The proposals submitted are currently being evaluated. But very relevant to the subject of today is our partnership with the pharmaceutical industry. We have been working closely hand to hand in the precedent framework programs of research in the context of the Innovative Medicine Initiative. And now we are really in the last steps of putting forward the successor, which will be the Partnership Innovative and Health Initiative. It's expected to be launched hopefully by the end of the year. It's in the last steps of the legislative decision making. And actually, we can expect from this partnership also to tackle at this point for two reasons. One, because it is indicated in the strategic research agenda of the future partnership, which is saying that it will implement activities, that the implementing activities will consider innovations in green manufacturing in order to lower the overall environmental footprint in accordance with the European Green Deal. So we can expect actions. And the other reason is because it will build on the lessons learned from its predecessor, IMI, where already some projects were allocated precisely to look into this field. You might be familiar with the project Première, prioritization and risk evaluation of medicines in the environment, that started last year and will be running until 2026. Around 10 million euros that have been allocated to deliver a framework for assessing and characterizing the environmental risks of active pharmaceutical ingredients, contributing to greener drug design. This project is building on the lessons learned from prior projects that were already funded in the past, like Chem 21 and IPI. So I mentioned also there will be other partnerships that will look at this, but I think that maybe the most relevant ones to mention one is the co-fund with member states that will be assessing the risk from chemicals. The PARCO fund currently being evaluated will look at measuring the chemicals in the following the project HBM4U. All these different instruments will, from a research and innovation perspective, have the main aim to see how we can find new ways of contribution to the green pharma, but also how to measure what the impact is in order to alert and be able to facilitate decision making and regulatory uptake. One important element about the new spirit of Horizon Europe and the way of doing research is that we are co-creating much more extensively than in the past with other DGs in order to ensure the uptake afterwards, because we can invest a lot of research, but if afterwards there is not an actor that is going to uptake the results of the research, it's a little bit it's clearly a loss of opportunity. So, for example, the topic I mentioned on green pharmaceuticals, as it is absolutely in the context of the pharmaceutical strategy, one of the other political priorities, it has been very much co-created together with colleagues from DG Sante and from DG Grow. So I will stop here, but as you see, from many different perspectives, we will also tackle this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Carmen. And you, in fact, touch across a huge number of really important topics, because this is not just something that we have to do. This is also an opportunity for Europe. You know, we sit ourselves now here with the need for economic regeneration. We need to address climate change. We need to address innovative medicines. So this should be seen as an opportunity for Europe's both research base and its industry base. And the way of enabling that reaches right into the policy and legislative and regulatory framework as well. So if we now come to our next panelist, Walter, this gives us a really nice insight into how Europe is responding from a research perspective, and and pushing and developing novel technologies that can go forward to help the European pharmaceutical sector achieve its green goals, but also in a competitive way. So Walter, welcome to the panel today.
Thank you very much, Claire, for the introduction. Allow me first of all to say that I'm very honored to be here within this panel, and I very much welcome the initiative of EuropaBio to talk about a healthy planet, about healthy people, and sustainability as a whole. From my perspective as manager of CESPE, which is the Center of Excellence in Sustainable Pharmaceutical Engineering and Manufacturing, it's a public-private partnership hosted at Kent University. I have, well, a lot of things to share, but I would like to highlight 4 of them today. The first one is basically technological innovation. What are the key technology trends in pharmaceutical processing and in biopharmaceutical processing that are likely or that tend to contribute to the reduction of the environmental impact? And I stress the word likely. It's clear that the manufacturing side of the future and Pharma 4.0, it will go towards, as we have seen in the past, the shift from batch towards continuous manufacturing. We are heading towards lower production volumes, continuous manufacturing setups, adaptive manufacturing. So basically very small, multi-product, flexible and scalable sites, where also the digitization is very important. Think of paperless work, also within validation projects and so forth. So this is a really important trend that we see from the research side related to sustainable pharmaceutical manufacturing. It will allow us to develop more environmental friendly components and manufacturing processes, but it will also help us to deal with issues that have been tackled also before. So it will help to secure the supply for medicines to Europe. So also deal with other sustainability aspects. So I said that these trends are likely to contribute. There is a lot of research being done towards that. But what is really key is that you integrate sustainability in an early R&D phase. And it was already mentioned by Monse. It helps to see sustainability not as a burden that we have to comply with, but as a real opportunity for business and an innovation driver, basically. So it's the same as what we see within the healthcare sector. I mean, we shift from diagnosis to prognosis. Get rid of your sustainability assessment that is being done a posteriori. We have to go towards sustainable design processes. So this is really important, and I will not deep dive into that, but I'm happy to take any questions on that, of course. So incorporate sustainability assessment in an early CMC stage gating process. A third point is basically on how to make that happen in a joint setting. And that's all about collaborative partnerships that are leading to sustainable ecosystems. And I would like to emphasize there the importance of the availability of the knowledge triangle. We know that excellent science is leading or will contribute to the development of talent and skills, to entrepreneurship, and thereby create a sustainable environment that will also again look at sustainability with an opportunity perspective rather than a burden. And it's really a key ingredient to create local ecosystems that can attract investments that will create an ecosystem of ecosystems. We have talked about local production and that globalization. There is a new trend basically towards the globalization. But we have to make sure that next to being excellent in clinical trials, in making new medicines, that it's also made in Europe. And those, let's say, ecosystem of ecosystems can really help in showing our expertise and attracting new investments. And a last point that is very much connected with that is the importance of both private and public investments in infrastructure. This as a leverage for scale-up of European capacity, not only manufacturing capacity, but I really mean also the European capabilities of the future in order to come to those factories of the future. An example I can give there, and I was inspired by Novartis, is the collaboration between MIT and Novartis in the US, where they have set up basically the first, at least that I'm aware of, the first integrated continuous manufacturing line, starting from the very early building blocks to basically the tableting of your final dosage form. And that all in one on a very concise footprint. That will also contribute to environmental sustainability and sustainability as a whole, because you can create on-demand medicines. And honestly speaking, also, if we would not have had in Europe the response through the Next Generation EU, and for instance, the Recovery and Resilience Fund, also our ambition and the vision of becoming a reference center in Europe for sustainable pharmaceutical manufacturing innovation, we will not be able to make it happen, because it simply doesn't fit within the funding channels. These kind of infrastructure, as was also mentioned by MEP Jutta, is extremely expensive. It's GMP-like. So we tend to create basically a flexible GMP-like open innovation accelerator and testing facility where both academia and industry can co-create on the sustainable manufacturing solutions of the future. So basically, to summarize, I would say a technological innovation, integration of sustainability and early R&D through collaborative partnerships and public-private investments.
Thanks very much indeed, Walter. And you are busy writing down notes of your words there, but I already had recovery and resilience funds written down, because it's something that we're looking at with our national associations as well, because this is a really fantastic opportunity for the individual countries within Europe to align themselves on how they invest long-term, particularly into facilities and skills development associated with that, because then not only do you have the national strength, but aligned across all of the countries as well. So it's a much greater, output than the sum of the parts, which is basically what Europe was invented for in the first place anyway. So I'm really happy to welcome our final panelist who has been able to join us. So Kristin, do you want to put your camera on and unmute your microphone? Lovely. And then Kristin's joining us to finally share the DG Grow perspective on the principles and priorities of sustainability for pharma. So take it away, Kristin.
Yes, thank you very much, Claire. I hope I'm not too dark. Somehow there's something with my camera, but I guess you can at least sort of...
You're looking a bit intriguingly interesting there in the shadows, but we can see you okay.
That was not the objective, but I mean, good. Okay, no, I mean, I'm very happy, and I just want to come in, since I'm the last one, briefly, because I think we also have interesting questions to discuss on the afterwards on the panel. But I have to say I was really intrigued by the starting point of this conversation today, because obviously this is not the first thing one thinks about in terms of green transition for biopharma. And actually, the more I think one thinks about it, the more one realizes, and I think previous speakers have already made that quite clear, that is actually a complete no-brainer and can be very much linked to other initiatives we have already ongoing, and putting basically specific also green focus in this context. So I mean, just to rebounce immediately, and then I'll come to the more general picture, to what Wouter said just now. I mean, indeed, the recovery fund, I mean, it's almost an important tool, and we have earmarked a very large percentage for green spendings. And so I think it's really, I mean, as you said, I mean, you get then the national dimension in as well. And I think logic, probably if you had asked beforehand, well, does it tick, you know, green, tick recovery fund, does it tick a box for biopharmaceuticals? Probably initially one would have thought, well, and I think there's actually a huge opportunity. And this was actually something I wanted to stress as well. So I'm very glad that we can make the link here. I mean, taking a step back, I mean, you know that we have come up with the update of our industrial strategy, which exactly wants to focus on the green and digital and resilient transitions. And I think more and more, when you dig deeper into the topic, you can see that the whole issue of the globally competitive economy, but also the big accent which we now put on the EU's open strategic autonomy, has a lot to do with sustainability. And I think in particular, for the whole biopharma industry, this is a very, very important consideration. What are we doing? We are looking at a sort of co-creation process together with industry, public authorities, but also social partners, to create these green and digital pathways for the different ecosystems. And the word ecosystem was already used a lot by previous speakers. And of course, we have, you know, it reflects different realities. But you know that under the industrial strategy, we do have a health ecosystem. And here again, this is not, it's not in the front running on the pathways. We have started with tourism and high energy intensive industries. But I think it's very relevant when we will develop that pathways, we can actually really put the sustainability aspect very much in the forefront here. Because I mean, let's face it, we need to have a much better understanding of the cost, long-term benefits, and required actions. And particularly in the context of this open strategic autonomy, I think it's crucial. And let me finally flag also the issue of green public procurement. It's across the board in terms of, I mean, a horizontal issue. But again, I think there is a reference also in the pharma strategy to this. And this is also a possibility where actually public authorities can have an input in terms of encouraging green production. And of course, I mean, as Wouter also mentioned it, when we have public-private partnerships, the sustainability issue, we have, of course, public-private partnerships also in the context of the Commission. We always look at this sustainability aspect. And lastly, and I don't want to monopolize the time, I think one nice example, I mean, to be also, you know, come from the very high level to the concrete, I mean, is the responsible antibiotics manufacturing platform project, which is, I mean, a very good example of co-creation between industry and policymakers, and where you can really, I mean, we don't only have a very important contribution in terms of security of the European supply chain, but clearly also very important from the point of view of sustainability. So just a couple of points from my side to hopefully fuel the debate. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you so much, Kristin. And I'll ask everybody now to switch their cameras on from our panelists, so we can all see who we're talking to for the rest of the webinar. But yeah, I think everybody's done amazingly well, because there are about 1,000 different talking points in a topic such as this. So we had the great challenge today of bringing it into a focus from which we can have future conversations. So I am going to jump in while I'm just waiting for Jutta and Carmen to switch on their cameras. I'm going to jump in with the first question to Monsi, if that's all right. You know, let's take this back to the industry perspective, because this is what brought us together in the first place. Achieving sustainability really needs action from everybody, as we've already established so far. What do companies need from policymakers, in particular EU policymakers, when it comes to environmental policy?
Thank you very much for the question. So as you already mentioned, that journey or that responsibility is a joint effort. So we recognize the importance to invest in sustainable solutions. That's why we have already set an ambitious targets. But that's what we need from the Commission and from the other EU institutions to really to help us on that journey. And for that, we need that they are really stick to their plans, that there are really no delays on the implementation, to really find that innovations and that investments, how we can really find in the best way that they are getting the most impact. And as already mentioned before, I think it's very important the smart procurement as well. Until now, we have seen procurement mechanisms in the different European countries that were solely based on the lowest price. This leads to issues on supply and endangers the sustainability of the healthcare system. So we would like to see much more smart procurement, which includes criteria on the environmental sustainability and security of supply in the procurement process. We have already started to work with our suppliers on that direction to establishing what we call a green expectations requirements. But this is really important, I think, to be much more embedded. This is a market mechanism which will have to tackle shortages, and it will give Europe a competitive advantage compared to other regions with a lower commitment to reach environmental targets.
No, I think those are really good points, because there is, as we know in Europe, there's no shortage of innovation. It's the non-scientific activities that enable that innovation to come into effect on any large scale. So Jutta, this reflects very obviously back to you. It says the European Parliament has a really important role in this. How will it work to help ensure that Europe can reach its climate goals whilst also ensuring patient access to innovative medicine?
It's a tricky issue, actually. I mean, we have just seen that the HERA proposal coming from the Commission, but actually the European Parliament does not have a role there, because the Commission decided that it would be fine to have the HERA authority just as a, let's say, a Commission committee, more or less, with no democratic participation by Parliament, which we found very well disappointing a bit, because of course Parliament gave free all that money that was needed to develop the vaccines, and we really try to do our best to improve the resilience of Europe. But then now being more or less shifted out of the game, we were quite disappointed about that. But we have this the Pharma Strategy, which was voted on, the initiative report will be voted on, and there we, of course, have seen a lot of improvement already in the European, let's say, answer to COVID-19, where Europe says, okay, we have to become more resilient here, we have to do better. And of course, this is something where the Parliament will vote on the Pharma Strategy. I think we will vote next plenary. I'm not sure, actually. I've lost count of so many opinions and in INIs which I have done in the last months. But basically there we are also calling for better funding for innovative medicine. We're calling for more restrictions actually on imports, where we are saying, please, Commission, do something on the international scale, try to bring this into GMP legislation. And we're of course also saying, well, we need a better approach for new antibiotics, because right now, as when you're manufacturing a new antibiotic, you have a lot of research cost, and you will probably not be refunded accordingly, because you have to say, well, here's this wonderful new antibiotic, but please don't use it, because then we will encounter again resistances. And therefore we need some incentives to actually have this innovative medicines also for orphan diseases. And that's something which we will have to work on in the coming months and years. Thanks.
No, I think those are all really good points, and particularly when it helps to create a level playing field so that European companies can afford to make the investment, but also it then works to get to level up other countries globally as well, and knowing that they will then be able to have good market access. And I'm keeping an eye on the time because I'm aware that Carmen has to leave us a little bit early. So I'm actually going to skip to Carmen's question next and then come back, if that's all right. So Carmen, I just wanted to say, how do you see EU partnerships developing further to address climate change goals? I mean, how do these types of partnerships help you achieve your policy goals?
Well, I think that, as I mentioned before, with Horizon Europe, we want to do a research that will be much more focused into the policy making. So first of all, to put forward topics that answer to policy needs and that will have a kind of end actor that will build on them in order to have an impact in the society, but also to ensure that the evidence coming from research is going to be more used by our regulators, but our policymakers. And in this context, partnerships is a very powerful tool because of the importance of engaging with many actors. I think that the only way we will achieve to really exploit all of those fantastic breakthrough and evidence is by engaging a lot with all kinds of stakeholders. And this through the partnerships will be much easier. For example, in the context of the Innovative Health Initiative, there will be a new body called the Science and Innovation Panel, where we expect the involvement of all kinds of important stakeholders in order to contribute to the definition of what should be the topics and priorities put forward in each of the work programs of the Innovative Health Initiative. And this involves regulators, patients, healthcare professionals, all kinds of, and obviously scientists, but to have a much more broad scope of the actors that will be critical in order to implement what we are aiming. And in the context of the public co-funds, as I mentioned, we have this co-fund on the assessment of the risk of chemicals, where we are directly engaging with the member states, with the different agencies that are responsible for that in the member states, but also with the regulatory agencies. We are also working on an important co-fund for the transformation of the healthcare systems, because we are talking a lot about the impact of pharmaceuticals in the environment, but the way healthcare systems are today organized or work have also a lot of things to improve or to modify, not only to face the critical future as concerns the aging of the population that is going to translate into additional costs, but also because a kind of credible transformation of healthcare systems cannot leave aside the environmental impact. So just to say that we have, and I have not mentioned all the different partnerships that will be active and running in the health field, but the important is that all of them are somehow interlinked, that the different governing boards are engaging with governing boards of the other co-funds to ensure maximal synergies and optimize the impact. Just to give an example, we expect that this future co-fund on transformation of healthcare systems will have somehow impact on what will be the priorities concerning unmet medical needs to be developed year by year by the Innovative Health Initiative. So as you can see or as you can hear from the different things I'm saying, what we want is to increase the synergies through the involvement of the different co-funds, the different instruments, the missions, but also the synergies with other EU programs that will be funded further from research, but that will be expected to take on the results coming from the research in order to help us deploy them in the member states. I don't know if that answers to your question, Claire.
No, it's great. I mean, because I have asked you to do about 10 years worth of work in a 2-minute answer. So it was perfect. Thank you. But yeah, you're right. You have to work in partnership because you can work to your full capability within your own sector and comfort zone. But it's only by working with other people that you find out the pathway for your work to be impactful where it needs to go. And I think that brings me to Walter. I mean, for you in translational research, what do these partnerships, these public-private partnerships need to deliver for each community?
That's a very good question, Claire, and I think that Carmen quite summarized that quite well. The end or the final goal is the same, is to go for a more sustainable environment. Of course, what is in there for the public and the private sector, I mean, it's logic that you interact more, that those synergies become stronger. And for the policymakers, I can imagine it is useful to hear from industry what are the bottlenecks, what are the industry trends, how can we improve certain regulatory aspects and do that in co-creation, for instance. I mean, I come back to what I've said on batch to continuous manufacturing. If we want to do that for ATMPs as well, there's a lot to be done, I think. It's a trend that I like to see that is happening in co-creation. So I can imagine that this is beneficial for both parties. As it comes to the private players, those kind of initiatives, they should really help companies to come up with more sustainable products and technologies, and that should go hand in hand. It should give them tools to enable decision making, as was actually already mentioned as an initiative by Novartis within product and process development. So the end goal is the same, but indeed, let's say the midterm objectives for each of the stakeholders could be fine-tuned along the way. Yeah, not sure if that answers your question, Claire, but
No,
I think there's a lot that can be said.
I had two questions for you back to back really now, because I was going to say, with the flow of knowledge and skills around the European research area, where do you see the greatest opportunities for Europe?
Actually, I'm already very happy, and these are very exciting times of what I see happening within the European research area. This was impossible 5 or 10 years ago. So yeah. First of all, that's really nice to see the proposal that was mentioned on green pharmaceuticals, large initiatives, the missions approach, if you would like to ask, or if you would ask me one thing to focus even more on, I would say is dare to jump and dare to invest in what we are really good at, and set up really large projects that can create impact. And I know we are doing that now to a large extent, but even more, I would say.
No, that's great. Yeah, we play to our strengths in Europe, of course. So I think that brings us to, let me come back to Monsi here. So can you give us some examples of the types of innovations that Novartis is looking at in terms of its sustainability thinking?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. As already mentioned, mainly we are really englobing in many different areas related to our fight against the climate change, especially for the planet. So we are doing a lot of efforts, mainly in our own operations. But as the majority of the pharmaceutical companies, the biggest challenge it is what we call a scope 3. In our case, we have 91% of our emissions are really coming from the suppliers. So that's why I was really insisting how much smart procurement is really important, because we need to work together with them. So we are really finding the way to work very closely, setting very clear expectations, but also working together to define the action plans and to really to help them to achieve their targets in the same way that they are supporting us on that. That's why by 2025, we want to have the environmental criteria already set in all the contracts to really to help us to go to that journey. Also in waste, it's really very important here. What we have done together with mobilizing all the efforts across all the network is really to eliminate single-use plastic across all the different organizations, and in the same way eliminating the PVC packaging. It's what we want to do by 2025. This reducing by half by 2025, and then eliminating as much plastic for the 2030. That means that we need to change the way that we are manufacturing. That's the reason that we need to do the things differently. And also we need also to help as well for the EU to support us in regulatory to make sure that all these different materials that we'll be using to help us really to make sure that they are of course stable, that there is no impact in the product quality, but definitely we need to use different materials that we are doing currently. And that's what we are already working on that direction. And water, as here has been already mentioned here, it's a very important. We as well in Novartis, as part with Sandoz, as well, very close working with the overall projects for antimicrobial resistance. But the key factors it is to eliminate by half or reduce by half the consumption of water, really to improve the processes to reuse much more water, and definitely to have really no water quality impacts in all the manufacturing effluents, which is really the key thing to make sure that we are not really affecting the overall quality of the water across all the organization. By 2030, we want to be water neutral in all the areas. We have already set out which are the areas which are in a stressed places, and we are already launching projects to support the communities to improve the water source and also to enhance water quality wherever we are operating. So these are a few examples, but what we need is really people all the time embed that mindset when they are defining new processes, when they are defining new ways to operate, because that's the only way that will be sustainable as well in a mid to long term.
No, that's great, thank you. And I think I'm going to say a quick thank you to Carmen and Jutta, who have to leave us shortly, because I mean, the preparation for this meeting has been really intense, trying to get such wide things down into a small set of discussion points for a first meeting. So I want to say thank you very much to you guys, because I know that you have to leave shortly. And that just also gives me the opportunity to put Kristen to work on her questions, in that we've had some really nice examples from Monty already, and how, you know, in terms of what they want to achieve, but how, Kristen, does Europe support good practices and give an extra boost for more industry activities in line with green transition objectives like this? You know, how does DG Grow play in here?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Claire. And I think, I mean, listening actually to Monty as well, I think we have to maybe distinguish between the sort of everything which is general, which does not only concern the pharmaceutical industry, and where there's of course a lot, and then the more specific points for the pharma industry. I mean, we touched upon the Recovery and Resilience Fund. I think this is really important because this is also an avenue for us. We have been screening through the different, you know, proposals to see that we have meaningful proposals there. Let me just mention one specific, not as the only one, but one specific action because it's timely and it may be of interest to people listening here. And that is actually the launch for the 30 cross-sectoral, interdisciplinary and trans-European strategic joint cluster initiatives in the Euro clusters. And when I think you're well aware what clusters are, these regional ecosystems of related industries and competences, sort of broad, fostering a broad range of inter-industry interdependencies. And here, of course, we also have a very important one in the context of health. And the deadline actually for these applications are the 30th of November. And I'm just mentioning it in this outfit because it may still be relevant for one or the other here. I noted with interest you mentioned, Monty, the focus on green supplies, on procurement, and I think this is something which, I mean, as I already said in my introductory remark, it's a big focus from a general perspective. And I mean, for public procurement, for of course public authorities, but I think it goes through procurement in general, the whole supply chain issue. And this is, I mean, in the context of the resilient supply chains and the strategic autonomy, this is something we will more and more focus on. And of course, especially I would say larger companies like yours can be a lot of help. I mean, the smaller ones are often struggling with all this. Knowing exactly how sustainable the different inputs are, but I think this will become, I mean, also for us, it's very prominent issue, and this will become in any case beyond DG Grow very prominent with also the Sustainable Corporate Governance Initiative. So I think all this, in order to have a sort of meaningful contribution, I think it's important that we see this very, very closely also in the pharma context. Huh? So I would just, I mean, flag these points, but in general, as I said, the transition pathways will have, and the whole point is that they're not an additional burden or an additional, sort of for industry to say, oh God, we have something else to contribute, but it should be a really genuine co-creation process and contain meaningful ways to achieve this, on the one hand, more digital, but also more green pathways. And I mean, my colleague from RTD Carmen already mentioned in the joint undertakings. I'm also active in the IMI, I mean, future IHI, and where indeed this is a consideration which we are now putting, and maybe also to reassure our parliamentarian Jutta Paulus. I mean, I fully understand the concerns of the Parliament on HERA. That is beyond my, I would say, pay grade. Just the simple answer is that the objective was to have something operational fast, and then of course, if you want something operational fast, it's a service of the Commission which is faster. But I think we will see how it will evolve in the longer run. And if we had gone for an executive agency, we would have spent 2 years setting up the agency without actually being really able to do the work in practice. So I know this is only meager consolation from the interinstitutional point of view, but here, of course, I would say this is, I mean, the issue of sustainability is also very much, I mean, in the broader sense, very much in the focus of the activities of HERA, with whom, of course, we are in close touch.
I think you make a really good point there, Kristin, because having worked in the biotech sector for more years than I care to count, the large companies have a critical role in helping build a long-term framework in which smaller companies can work then more easily, because they do a lot of long-term strategic planning and investment, and their good practice and the learning and the structures they set up help small companies as well, because they then don't have to do the heavy lifting on how they might address smart procurement and stuff like that. There are templates and good practices that they can use themselves in-house. So it's always been a really interesting role in terms of how larger companies help create the foundation in which many other activities are delivered by smaller companies. But I'll stay with you for a moment, Kristin, but just to ask, what are specific DG GROW priorities for the green transition? Can you give us a couple of words on that?
Yes, I think already partly. I mean, I think,
yeah.
As I said, we're really working from the ecosystem point of view on the transition pathway. So that's our big GROW, I would say, priority, to have the industrial dimension for a start of, let's say, the health ecosystem, but with this, I mean, sustainability twist of having very concrete, I would say, recommendations, building blocks for the pharma industry. And here, of course, very much in the context of also, I mean, you're all aware of the structured dialogue in the pharma sector on the supply chains, which is a very, I mean, one often thought that it was linked now to the current COVID crisis, and obviously COVID crisis has given it a new acuity, but this is really a long-term strategic consideration to look at the supply chains and the issue of, I mean, sustainability. Again, this was not the starting point, but I think it's now a very important consideration in this process. So we're really into, I would say, dependency supply chains. That is where basically the take from the DG GROW perspective comes in, but also let me just refer, I think it was Wouter who mentioned the importance of skills in the ecosystems. We likely also to work on skills, probably it's very much linked to digital, but needed specifically for the health ecosystem. So this is an angle for us as well. I mean, you're well aware that all the regulatory angle of the pharma strategy, that is of course for DG Santé. So we're really trying to come in, I would say, through skills, through the supply chains and all these different aspects, the dependencies we have. I mean, you've seen also we have now started dialogues with the US, and of course we have our vaccine task force on this very particular area. But we're also trying to learn the lessons from the vaccine task force, because if I may, we can conclude with that. There we had an activity which is very unusual for the Commission, that we really went into very individual supply chains. We actually called up companies, who this company needs plastic bags of a particular volume, who has them, etc. So which is, I mean, we organize matchmakings normally, but we don't sort of go into that detail that we would pick up the phone calling companies, and I think some of the lessons learned from that will be very useful also in a more broader perspective on the, I would say, looking, of course, not in such an interventionist way, I think, but looking at what is needed, you know, for sustainable supply chains in the long run.
No, I think that those are great points, because COVID was a really horrible way to focus the mind and ask very specific questions that reflected broader sort of strains in the supply chain. And of course, for Europe to be sort of green, competitive and robust, that doesn't happen with old technologies. That only happens with new technologies. So this is why this is an amazing opportunity for Europe to invest and really get ahead of the curve in terms of the next generation technologies that we are going to see supporting healthcare. But Monse, I will come back to you to wrap up these questions today, to say, where does Novartis want to be in 10 years' time in terms of its achievements for sustainability?
So as we already told you, our aspiration it is to be a catalyst for a positive change and a leader in environmental sustainability. So in 10 years, we need to be able to achieve not only the carbon neutrality that we want to be by across all the value chain by 2030 and to be plastic neutral and as well water neutral, but also to be a leader. And that means that we need to work together with other pharmaceutical companies, with the ecosystem, that for us to be also a catalyst for that change. It's really very important that we are really working as well on embedding that sustainability in our products, that as in 2030 onwards, we are able to deliver medicines that they are, of course, not only extend and improves people's life, but at the same time have a positive impact to the planet as well. So that's what we wanted to work. It's a lot to be done. And then definitely in all of that journey, what happens is that sometimes people can feel a little bit frustrated because you see the outcomes not in a short term, you see the outcomes much more on the mid-long term. So a lot of resilience, a lot of patience, but do not give up, because I think that there is no plan B. And then if there is no plan B, we need to really to make sure that we are putting all the efforts together, either the public sector, the private sector, to make that happen.
No, thank you. Those are very wise words, I think, to wrap up with. So I'm going to bring everything to a close now and say thank you very much indeed to all of our speakers who took part today. As I said, it was a fascinating topic, and one that's been really, I can tell you, it is really popular across our members because they are all traveling this journey right now from slightly different perspectives. So we were really happy to have the opportunity to host a discussion topic around it. So thank you very much to Kristin for joining, to Walter for your really the next generation translation for Europe to make it competitive, and to Monse for helping show how large companies need to lead the way and how they work with their own global partners, but with also the wider sort of policy and legislative and regulatory framework to actually deliver this, both for sustainability perspectives and also for safe medicine. So thank you all very much indeed, and thank you to the very many people that joined us today in the webinar. This has been recorded and will be available to all registered delegates, and we really look forward to continuing the conversation as we go through the rest of the year and into 2022. So thank you again all very much. It was excellent, and we look forward to seeing you the next time.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.